Okay, here I am giving a quick demo of the work that I did to mock up what I'd expect you to do in Worksheet 3. First thing I'm doing is pretending to find the work that I'd done for Worksheet 2 and load that up into Visual Studio. In this particular example, I don't have to reconstruct the database because I'm working on a single machine. As you're moving from machine to machine, you might find you've left your database behind. So it's important that you also remember to create a new database if necessary and construct that database using the SQL provided. Making sure it builds, of course it does. I'm now going to test it. And it's important that you do a comprehensive test. In this particular case, I'm just going to have a look at the categories because the products are all yours to do. The second thing I'm going to do is draw into this solution the great work of art that I apparently have done for Worksheet 2, which is build a web service that sits on top of the Hebron shop, so I've called it the Hebron Web Service. I'm adding that project. Once again, you might have to rebuild the database. I don't have to. Make sure it builds and then debug it. I think it's really important that you do a comprehensive testing of the categories and the product services that you've built in before you start to integrate them into the MVC app. So I'm booting up the WCF test client. Come on, you can do it. And I'm going to make sure that I can see all the categories. Yep, there they are. And I'm also, despite my spelling, going to have a go at making sure I can get a category by name. Oh, isn't one called cases, but there might be one called case. There is. Once again, this example doesn't visualize or show you the products because that's part of your ICA. But I now have effectively an MVC app and a service, and what I now need to do is to add a service reference between the MVC app and the web service. Adding this service reference does an enormous amount of auto code generation behind the scenes. I found the Hebron service. I'm going to give it an appropriate name, or accurately give the namespace an accurate name. Don't forget to press Advanced. At some point we might want to play with asynchronous, and we've got to make sure that we don't reuse the types. Press OK, and away it goes and generates the code. It's actually generating a proxy client that I can simply program against inside the host application. So I'm going to create a controller specifically just to test the web service. This is not directly moving towards the answer for the in-course assignment, but it's a very important intermediate step to make sure that I'm solving one problem at a time, and that's to make sure I know how to bind my MVC app to the web service. The first step along this road is to create a client local to this controller, in fact private to this controller. Here we go. So I'm having a look at the Hebron service, which exposes a Hebron client. I'm going to give this a name, imaginatively client. What the client gives me is access to a set of classes that I simply can imagine were available to me locally. In a way, the fact that they are remote and they are drawing down data from a web service is at the moment hidden from me. So what I'm now going to do is use the client to access all categories. So I need a local variable. I'll call it Hebron categories. And into that Hebron categories, I'm going to put a collection of categories that have been drawn down from the web service as represented by the client via the categories method. A moment will come when I will actually want the user to be able to see those. So I'm going to send that model to the view. But before I construct the view, I'm going to test. So I'm going to put myself a breakpoint and bring the application to life. And the sole purpose of this test is to make sure that the client is making use of the right class, which in turn is drawing down the right data from the right web service. So I'm driving myself into the Hebron service test. There we go, we've stopped. And if I expand and look inside, there are the categories that have successfully been drawn down from the web service, made available to me via the client, and I can gain access to them through the categories class, sorry, the categories method. So, I'm now in a position where I can add a view. This is going to be a strongly typed view, and the type is effectively going to be the DTO that's exposed by the web service. Naturally, I want a list, and I'm going to use the underlying layout. Add the view. There's the view that's been scaffolded for me. There's the type. And I don't want to see category IDs. I think they're particularly ugly even in prototypes. So I'm going to comment that out. Comment this out. And bring the great work of art to life. And there, ladies and gentlemen, in a few seconds are the categories that have been drawn down from the web service. No idea what all that was about. Let's move on. Kids, eh? We'd have them. Anyway, here we have my list of categories, and you'll notice that right now the details, oh, something's gone wrong. The default code doesn't work, and there's a number of reasons for that. The first is what I want is actually categories by name, not categories by ID, and it's currently not passing me the name as a parameter. So if I drive back into the index and I have a look at the action link associated with details, what I want passed across is not the primary key, but a variable called name, whose value is equal to the current item and the name property of that item. So that's what I'm going to get back from the view. Inside the controller, I'm expecting a string called name. Let's put a breakpoint in there just so we make sure all is well. So I'm going to give it another quick test. Once again, we're driving into the service. Oh, no one's crying. Looking good this time. If I hover over details for cases, you'll see that I actually have a URL appended with a parameter name and cases. I have a URL appended with a name. I have a URL appended with a name and a value. There's the name. So I think I should be able to write some code that makes use of that now. Creating a local variable that's going to hold a particular category. And I'm going to dive into the client, which exposes category by name. And all it needs is the name that came in as the input parameter. And I'm reasonably confident now, but I'm going to test it again. Once more, let's drive ourselves to the right controller. Have a look at the details. That's the input parameter. I'm making use of that. I'm getting category by name, and there's the category. Is it the right category? Yep, it's the right category. What I now should be able to do is be quite confident that I can make use of that and pass it to a view. What I'm now going to do is construct a view or scaffold the view. It's called details. I'm using the same class. It's a strongly typed. I'm going to scaffold myself for details. Press add. The details view has been added. And just like before, I'm going to make a tiny little edit because I can. I'm going to move things around a little bit. So name is displayed before description. I might consider making use of changing that stuff later on. Oh, you're a goner. I don't need it. Let's test. And what I've successfully achieved is I've brought in the work from Worksheet 1, I've brought in the work from Worksheet 2, I've made a service reference between the MVC app and the WCF service. I've created a client that gives me access to the operations exposed by that service, and I've modded the controller to demonstrate to myself that I can successfully consume the data that comes out of those operations.